Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. Guys, I've got a really interesting podcast for you tonight. I've got Matt with me, and Matt had several Class A encounters with Bigfoot when he lived in Orange County, California. He was out exploring a property and started having these strange encounters with these creatures, everything from getting trees and rocks thrown at him to one encounter where he was really extremely close to this creature one night when he was on a hike. We're going to get into all that, but before we do, I just want to say thank you for being here and being part of this podcast. I could not do it without you guys. If you've got an encounter or a mystery you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Let's jump right in the story. Matt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, man, and I appreciate you taking the time to share this encounter. And I know this has really impacted your life from what you've told me. So why don't you take us back to Blackstar Canyon in California and kind of walk us through your first encounter?
My first encounter happened in a place called Blackstar Canyon out in Orange County, California. It's in the out in the Santa Ana Mountains out there, the Cleveland National Forest. And a lot of people, they go, Orange County, you can't have had a Bigfoot sighting in Orange County. But the more I went back, I looked, because Riverside's right behind where I had my sightings. It's down on the other side of the hills. It's kind of out in the desert. And then I looked into Orange County itself, and before it became Orange County, there were sightings of Bigfoots. So, and the more I did my research, I'm like, holy crap, people have had sightings in all over Orange County. They're older reports. And then, you look in all the mountain ranges up in California most of them have Bigfoot reports. You look at Big Bear, you look at the Los Angeles mountains, you look at Northern California, up in the Sierra Nevadas and stuff like that. And then there's something called a desert squatch out in San Diego, and it's out in the mountains, out in the desert. Anything can happen up there. If a UFO flew down and landed right in front of me, I would not be surprised. You have Dogman reports up there now, Slender Man, and other activity. People have been murdered up there. Supposedly there was a war where a bunch of Indians were killed, which I found out was actually not true. But Indians still live up in those hills. It's very hard living. And then you have the possible Bigfoots. Now, the road up to that road up there is, if you don't know California, they have a lot of wildfires. So this is just a fire access road for the fire department. But they put this road in, it's a single lane road, not a single lane road each way, a single lane road, or it used to be, that basically they have a gate in front of, and it basically winds up into the mountains and ends up in Riverside, California. This area is very secluded. It's right in the middle of Orange County, but it's forested, and it goes up to about 4,500 feet. And so the more I started kind of going up there, I had previous experiences that I didn't know were Bigfoots. We had gone around a corner one day, and this beautiful oak tree, probably about 8 feet wide. I mean, it's huge, just this massive oak tree. It must be hundreds of years old, and it grows right down by the creek. So we're walking around that corner of this beautiful oak tree, and you hear bang, 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 and people shot guns up there. The locals didn't like people on that road, especially after dark. And so I thought somebody was shooting a shotgun at us. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I looked at myself. I'm like, okay, I'm not hit. And I turned around and asked the people, everybody okay? And everybody's like, yeah. Then it happens again. It sounds more woody. And I didn't put two and two together at this point. And then you hear what sounds like a giant something or other. Boom, 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 away. And I just never put two and two together. I could tell something was walking. But I'm like, I just thought it was maybe some local kids trying to mess with us. So, and then going back to the very first time we went to Blackstar Canyon, everybody told us, oh, you need to stay out of there. It's a bad area. You shouldn't go up there. We were walking down the road, and we got about halfway down to that first turn, and essentially something was crouched down, and I'm 6'2", and this thing was as tall as me, crouched down. I'm like, okay. And then we got within about 30 feet of it, and it stood up and literally one step the road and then disappeared behind a tree. And I didn't know at the time, but that tree, if you go up behind there, there's a trail that leads up the mountain. And so, that gives them a height advantage. They can get up there, they can look down, they can see you from anywhere up there. I mean, they have the total height advantage because you can't go up there unless you're allowed to. But so that was my very first experience. And I didn't put any of this together until Halloween night. So I'm talking to this crew and I'm like, okay, this is, I always put a safety spiel together. And I told everybody had to stick together, nobody wander off. Two girls were over to my left, and there's a little mound, and then the fence is down below the mound, and then it kind of opens up into a pasture. And literally there's trees kind of horseshoed out there, right? And it's kind of open, and there's a few tall trees in the middle. And there's a little tiny tree that was only about, I think it was about 10 feet tall at the very top, but it was only, probably about 3 or 4 inches diameter around the trunk was. So they go, hey, somebody just threw rocks at us. And I'm thinking, okay, there's teenagers up here. They're just over there trespassing, being stupid. And they're like trying to scare us out of here, right? So I said, okay, let me know if it happens again. Well, she goes, no, it just happened again. I'm like, where are the rocks landing? Oh, right at our feet. I'm like, okay, what? That's weird. So I took the 6 biggest guys, and I'm like, we walked over on top of that berm, and we're looking down there, and I'm not seeing any. It's dusk. It's not dark. It's not light. It's kind of in between. And I had a little monitor flashlight on my hat, and so I start scanning from left to right. I start looking this way. I'm like looking for these kids. I'm like, these kids are going to get chewed out, right? And I get about to 45 degrees this way, and I kid you not, there's this huge, hairy thing, silvery gray, standing there. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2", I'm a big burly guy. I'm a little overweight, unfortunately. But this thing was at least double my height and maybe 3 or 4 of me wide. I mean, it was as wide as I could put my arms out. That's how wide this thing is. It must have been 5-6 feet wide. And the head on that thing, I mean, it looked like a giant watermelon. Talk about coned head. And it was just standing there. And I'm like, I looked at the other guys. I'm like, am I seeing this? I don't do drugs. I'm like, am I actually seeing this? And they're like, yeah, that's a Bigfoot. I'm like, okay, it's not just me. I'm trying to check myself to make sure I'm not like seeing things. I'm like pinching myself. This thing's real. And I guess after I picked my jaw up off the ground, they go, hey, Matt, you need to go get a camera or something. You have a camera with you? And I should have got the video camera. I carried a little kit. I had a video camera, a little old Sony, 20-year-old Sony Handycam. This back in the day, it was only a couple of years old, but that had night vision. But I went and got the little Coolpix. So this little Coolpix has this little tiny flash, right, that you flip up. You've all seen those. And so I take a picture of this thing, and the flash goes off. Oh my God, this thing went like this, and it growled at us. I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna get eaten or something. It's gonna come over here and just rip us to shreds. I mean, it could have gotten to us a couple, 3 or 4 steps. I mean, we couldn't have run away fast enough. And so I go like this. I'm like looking down at the picture. I'm like, oh, I didn't get it. It's just dark. It's too dark. And I even had my monitors like, shining on it. And it was about 30 feet away. And so, smart guy I am, I'll go, oh, let's take a look. I guess I had a death wish that night or something, right? So I snap another one, and it just looks at us. It's like, are you serious? And so then we just standing there. I'm like, I looked at the picture. I'm like, okay, I see something. It was just dark. All you saw was like a black outline and then black out behind it. And we tried, took it to multiple people that do photography, and they couldn't fix it. When we negative it, you could kind of see an outline, but you couldn't see it at all. And it was just too dark, unfortunately. So anyways, as I'm standing there, I'm like sitting there. We're just having a staring contest at this point in time. And so I go, we can see you, right? And it kind of growled at us again. And then it walks over. It takes about a foot, one step. It covered about 5 or 6 feet in just a very short step. Then took another step behind that tree I was talking to you about with a small diameter. And I think we measured it at 12 feet or something like that. So it's standing on this tree, and imagine your belly button, at the top of the tree, and the head, chest and head, 3 or 4 feet above that. And it's probably about 3 feet above that, I think. So it was pushing 14, 15 feet. And it was just standing there, and I go, we can still see you. And it grabs the tree, with its hands. It just grabs a tree. And I didn't know that they picked up trees and threw at people or tricked trees or anything at that point. And so I'm like, okay. And then it stomps off. I mean, when it walked over there, it didn't make any noise. But man, it went boom, boom, boom. It shook the ground. It felt like we were having an earthquake. I kept my eyes open the rest of the night, but I never did see it again. And so going home, and my wife laughs about this every time I say this. I call her up like a bumbling fool. Oh my God, they're real. Blah, blah, blah. And she's like, slow down, slow down. What's real? And I'm like, I just saw Bigfoot. She's like, oh my God, what are you smoking? What did they give you? Have you gotten enough sleep? So I'm like, no, but they're real. And, I have this saying, I don't expect anyone to believe until you've had an encounter. And you can put this in anything, ghost, UFO, Bigfoot, whatever, where you can say it couldn't be anything else but, right? So she's seen things, but she can't say it was a Bigfoot for sure. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have, after that, I started seeing them all the time. Daytime, nighttime. I was going up there all hours of the day and night. I mean, I would go up there at 8 o'clock in the morning and come home at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon if I was off and Amanda was working. Or I'd go up there at, 7, 8 o'clock, come home at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and just wandering around, walking up and down the trail. And they would show themselves to me every once in a while. I got a picture of one standing, just basically trying to look like a tree. It's like standing sideways, and you can see the head port for, this was taken a long, long time ago, with a 5 megapixel flip camera. So, yeah, the technology back then, and then back then you could see it. I mean, you could zoom in, you could see the hair, the light shining off the hair. It was the coolest thing, and you could see another one standing right next to it. But as time went on, I started to have more and more encounters. I mean, I walked out one night and I had not had any experiences at all, but it was dead quiet, no nothing, and it was just basically like a night hike. Didn't see any animals. There was no grasshoppers making any noise. No noise at all. And I'm like, what the hell is going on tonight? And so I'm walking out, and I felt like I was being watched. And so I walked past the gate, and right by where the gate is, it kind of goes up. It's probably about 20, 25 feet high, and it kind of wraps around to one side and kind of smooths out the little hill. And then it goes all the way down about, I don't know, another 3 or 4, like a football field length. And up there, then it flattens out. There's trees all along there. So I'm walking out past the gate, and there's an old ranch that used to be there. It's old Irvine Ranch Conservancy, and that's basically the company that manages that property. And so I just felt like I was being watched. And so I had a flashlight. I think it was like 2,000 lumens. So it's like I had light. And I started scanning because I thought maybe there was a deer or something over there. So I was scanning left to right, and I get to this point where there's a Bigfoot standing there. It was brown. It was about my height and shape, and it was just standing there staring at me like, what's going on, buddy? And as soon as I spotlighted it, it kind of gave me a look. It's this disapproval look. And then it literally did the Patterson-Gimlin film. It literally did the whole body turn. It took one step, and then another step, and then in the middle of the second step, it turned its whole body, the whole upper body towards me, and looked at me, and I'm like, holy crap, that's the Patterson-Gimlin gate right there. And then it took another step, and then pretty much, I think it went about 100 yards in about 5 or 6 steps. It just disappeared. And I know exactly where it went because I followed up later that night, but it didn't make any noise. So that didn't make any sense to me. So I kind of snuck up into that area. Then I'm walking back there, and there's a bunch of old dead branches and deadfall and all this stuff. And I'm walking, I'm going, like, how did this thing not make any noise? And in my research, I figured out they must have, we have fat in the bottom of our heels and the balls of our feet and stuff like that to kind of pat us. But it makes me wonder if they have more fat in the bottoms of their feet all along, so that when they walk on something, and it doesn't make a lot of noise. It's kind of a stealthy kind of thing where they can walk and hit something or crunch on something, and it just absorbs instead of being crushed. So I think that's probably what happened. But I did so many tours up there. We were walking back one night, and It's probably about 7 or 8 o'clock, and a juvenile literally comes running down the side of the hill, and it was like a blur. And they had just smoothed out the road with sand, so it was soft sand. And I don't think this thing knew it, and had pushed most of it. It was gravel and sand, so they had pushed most of it to the side where the barbed wire fence was. And this thing literally comes running by. It's just a blur, and it steps right over the barbed wire fence, was probably about 4 feet high, and then disappears down into that creek bed, right? So it left a heel print about that big. We're in the sand where the sand had bermed. It crushed it down. I'm like, the people were walking ahead of me. I'm like, did you see that? They're like, the Bigfoot? I'm like, yeah, okay, you saw it too. Like, it just ran right in front of us. You know, it was probably about 7 or 8 o'clock. It wasn't quite dark yet, but it just ran right by us. I figured out later that they were, the more of the research I did, I kept seeing them along this river bed. And so this dry riverbed, and so I started kind of doing some research down there. I never found any tracks, unfortunately, but the more I researched in there, the more I figured out they were using that as a highway. They use creeks as a highway, because if you look at it, the trail's up about 8 or 9 feet above where the bottom of that riverbed is, and there's a lot of rocks and stuff like that. So it's not, you're not going to leave prints unless it's wet. And so they're using that as a highway. They're coming up and down through the mountain range, going through there. So I'm like, I got a smart idea. And this was not my last encounter, but the last one I actually saw one. This is probably my 20th encounter up there, where I've actually, I was a Bigfoot where I could say it couldn't be anything else but a Bigfoot. And so I'm walking up there to just do ghost hunting. And as I'm walking up, I got up to where the mine was, which is about a mile and a half from where my car was parked. And I'm up about, I don't know, 1,000 feet, 1,500. No, it's actually about 3,000 feet up in the mountains. And I hear this, I thought it was a mountain lion. I kept hearing growling. I think they're mimicking a mountain lion. So I'm up there, and I keep hearing behind me, there's barbed wire fences on both sides of me, probably about at least 4 feet high. And so I'm like, okay, I put the camera on this side of the road, the left side of the road, and I took the audio recorder and put it in the nook of a tree right there. And I walked back over stupidly to where that barbed wire fence was. And I'm like, okay, if a cat jumps over and gets me, at least you'll know what happened to me, right? So I'm sitting there. There's trees, of course, and then there's bushes, right? And there's this bush that's probably about 6 feet wide and probably about 7 or 8 feet tall. And all of a sudden I hear this commotion. And I'm like, what is that? And it's coming from the river bottom. And I start hearing something like moving. This bush starts going back and forth, and you hear, I'm like, oh my God, it's a Bigfoot. And I think it was trying to scare me out of there. And they must have been hunting, because I'd seen them. We had actually seen them in a circle as we went up towards the mine. Because you get up another 100 feet and about 40, 50 feet up the trail, you can look down into the valley. You can see where the creek is, and it flattens out down there. Anyways, so this goes on for, it felt like forever, but it's probably about 30, 40 seconds. And then I just grabbed my handy cam, and I'm recording this. And of course, I didn't have enough IR light because it was just too dark. I could see it, the tree moving with my eyes, but the camera couldn't pick it up. It was about 10 feet away from where I was. And so back and forth the tree goes, and the grunting, and then all of a sudden I see it take off in the clearing, running up the creek bed. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, holy crap, I just got a Bigfoot on camera, right? And no, actually I didn't. Unfortunately not. So I start walking down the road, and this road kind of goes around and swerves to the left a little bit, and the mountain range kind of comes down like this, and there's a plateau there where it kind of smooths out, where they kind of cut through the side of the hill. And so I'm walking by there, and I'm right next to it. I mean, I'm like a foot away from the side, because I didn't want to be next to the creek bed. I was staying as far away from the creek bed as I could, because I could kind of hear growling happening on that side, like it was still following me. And all of a sudden, I walk by, and I look over to the corner of my eye, and literally there's this thing. It's probably my height, crouched down, and it's just standing there, two red eyes. I didn't look. I kind of turned and looked at it, and went, oh crap. I took about 6 steps, and I called that one the bouncer. There was two. I think they were twins. Big brown one. The brown one seemed to be more stocky than tall. The black ones seemed to be the taller ones. But anyways, this thing was probably about 5 or 6 feet wide, and it was probably like 6 or 7 feet tall, maybe 8 feet. But it was as wide as it was almost tall, and it just looks at me as I walk by, and I didn't stop because I think if I had stopped, I mean, I could have reached out. It could have reached out and touched me. I mean, I could have grabbed some fur and run. I don't think my brain's going, can I outrun this thing? I'm like, no, don't do it. I was terrified. I was like, holy crap. I was like a foot away from this thing. I mean, literally a foot away from this thing. And I took about 6 steps to turn around. It was gone. No noise, just gone. But so I started walking down after that, and I hear like something like a bulldozer's going through the brush on top of me. It had flanked me, I think. It either flanked me, it went up the side of the wall, or there was multiples, which there probably was. Probably a family group, probably hunting. But it followed me down around the corner and then almost all the way out to the gate, because it's basically forest. You can hear them going over there. I thought I heard them kind of make gorilla sounds like, oh, you can hear them chit chattering. And got to the gate, and I kept walking. I had to go another, I don't know, 300 or 400 feet down. And I was like, holy crap. But that was the last time. I saw silver gray one. I saw brown, I saw black, and I think I saw red up there. So, and that's all the same colors as Gigantopithecus supposedly were. That was my last encounter. I went up, it took me 3 months to go back up there after that. I was so terrified of that place. I'm like, I got to get back on the horse. I got to go back up there.
I don't blame you, man. You definitely come across a hot spot, and you're right, man. They must have just gotten used to you being in the area, and there's a lot to unpack there. But one of the things I like to ask people right off the bat, from somebody who wasn't a believer, who had an encounter, saw these things, how did that impact your life, man?
Well, I started doing more research into them, spending a lot more time on the computer, doing research, trying to figure out about them. I started watching that show, Finding Bigfoot and stuff like that, and trying to learn as much as I could. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, and I watched all the shows, the Unsolved Mysteries, and, what was that one show? What was it? Unsolved Mysteries, Findings, and all those other shows. And they always had a little bit of Bigfoot stuff on there. I forget the one that was real popular. Basically, it was almost all Bigfoot stuff. But I'll think of it as soon as we're done here. But anyways, yeah, the more I researched it, the more I was just in love with it. The more I just kept, like, my wife thought I was crazier and crazier than I already was. So, yeah, I started telling people about it. They're like, dude, there's no way. I mean, I've met several other Bigfooters. They're like, no, there's no Bigfoots up there. I'm like, you should go up there and look before you tell me no. You go do your own research. I mean, we were just back there for my dad's birthday back in July, and we went up there, and I took a friend of ours from Orange County, and we saw him. You can see him. In fact, we got a thermal image of something behind one of the trees. It had gone through and was behind it. There's trees that were kind of in a line, and you could see it kind of step out. I got a picture of it right as it stepped out and then step behind another tree. And he's like, "Oh my God, they are here." I'm like, "Yeah, this is a hot spot for them." And since I left, there seems to be like there's generations of them. I think the silver gray one, I always thought that maybe it just showed itself because it didn't care because it was older. Maybe it just didn't, maybe it got caught walking across the area, or was just curious about what we were doing. Maybe it was just out there watching me that night. I don't know. It's like, oh, yep, he's here. Go watch, see what he's doing. I mean, we were out there one night with this couple, and we got there at like 11 a.m. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was doing this call blasting, no, nothing. So we got out to where the gate was, and right above us up on that plateau, you hear this, oh! I mean, it was reverberating off of our chests, and it just stopped us in our tracks. I just turned off the audio recorder, of course, and as soon as I got it on, I got the last like 2 seconds of it. So you hear, oh, I'm like, that didn't do it justice. I mean, that thing was loud.
You sound a lot like me, and once you know these things are real and they're out there, you kind of go down this rabbit hole of research and trying to figure out what these things are and what's going on. And I would have been just like you that last encounter you had where you were so close to it. I'd have been afraid to go back too, man, because with these things you never know. But man, what do you think kept you safe that night?
I think it did exactly what it wanted to. It wanted to chase me out. I don't think it felt threatened. Now, if I was carrying a gun or if I turned and pointed something at it or tried to take a knife out at it, then it probably would have done something. I wouldn't be sitting here. People disappear up in those hills all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. I think they know what a gun is. I think they know what a knife is, and they obviously didn't see you as a threat. So man, it's smart that you didn't do any of that stuff, because I think a lot of some of the missing 411 people are because of those kind of situations. Maybe I don't know for sure, but did you ever see really good details of any of the faces, and then also did you ever smell anything during those encounters at all?
Never smell anything during the encounters. Usually, we would be walking up there, and you just get this smell of it. Smelled like skunk. It was this skunky, like wet dog smell, and you're like, "What? Oh!" And it'd be there for like a second or two, and then it'd go away. And I'm pretty sure they were down below us in the creek, because the creek was down below as you walked in by the gate, and then it kind of went off to the side and went over. And I found out later there's actually over on the other side, other hill that's in there, because it kind of Blackstar's on this side of the mountain, and then there's limestone and all these other canyons where it kind of comes down like this. And so on the other side there's cave systems. It's old limestone and sandstone. So caves have been carved out through water and all that stuff running through there. And so I'm pretty sure that was just basically an area they stayed at. I also know that if you went towards Irvine Lake, which was right through the middle of the two hills, you kind of walked along the side of the creek, and then it would turn to the left, and we would always go right, because you could go over there, but again, it's private property. I think they were hanging out. There was a bunch of trees in the middle, and we'd always see eye shine over there. We take the night vision binoculars, and I didn't have one that recorded at that point. Now I do. I have military gear, but you could see the eye shine, and you're like, oh my God, like I was saying that one day we were up where the mine was, and you're probably 200 feet above them, and you can see the creek run by, and we just saw them sitting in a circle, and they were almost like they were communicating. We couldn't hear them; they were too far away, but they couldn't see us. Thank God. We were kind of standing the lip of the hill. If you stood back far enough, you could see them, but they couldn't quite see you. I'm sure they picked up on us sooner or later. They couldn't smell us from up there either, but they were in a circle, and they were kind of like pointing at each other, and then two of them got up and walked away up the creek. So I think they were kind of planning out their thing for the night. I think they were all different shapes and sizes. But as when we first moved to Texas, I put an ad out on Facebook, and a guy responded to me, and he's saying everything that is Bigfoot related. I have this, this, and this, and this, and I have tree bends, I have tree knocks, I have howls, I have screams. I'm getting things thrown at my trailer. My trailer's been rocked. I've seen Bigfoot stick their head in the windows, and tree bends forever. I'm like, dude, this guy's sounds like he's nuts, right? But he's saying all the right things, and I could tell he didn't know what was going on. He was terrified. And so his name was Joe, and unfortunately he passed away last year. And so his property is like a football field. It's like 55 acres. He has a logging road, and then basically he had these beautiful pine trees that were probably 100 years old. Some of them were 2 or 3 feet across. I mean, they were big enough you could go stand behind it and you couldn't see us. But and they came down almost to like the first 20 yards of his property. He mainly stayed in the front part of the property, and the back was mainly forest. And he lived up in the Sabine National Forest. So I went out there. I'm like, oh my God, this guy! It was just too good to be true. I'm like, I got to go check this out. He was right. Holy crap! I got Bigfoot's walking through my property night and day. I see him all the time. I'm like, this guy is like smoking something, right? He was telling the truth. So we spent almost 3 years researching up there. and we were up there like at least once a month, and we spent a weekends up there. We stayed with him, and so he had his trailer on the left side of his property, and he had the forest right there, and he had a old logging road that he actually cleared, that went up to the back of his property on the left and the right. And so we had just taken a break, and I had all the gear. He had a picnic table, and we're sitting out on his at his picnic table, and we're looking up towards the top of his property on the left. And as I'm sitting there, um, it wasn't night. It was the middle of the day, so it's very clear. You can see forever. You can see the back of his property real easy. Even though it's kind of, if you look into the forest, you can't see very far in because it's so thick. But long story short, sitting there, and I look up, I'm like, wait a minute, is there a tree that's supposed to be there in the middle of the road? And I'm like, Joe, I kind of nudged him because he was sitting on this side of me, on my right side. I'm like, look up there. And he's like, is that a tree? He's like, no, there's no tree there, Matt. This huge thing. I think it was the dominant male. And so it's literally mid stride. I mean, like, again, Patterson Gimlin, it's literally turned the whole upper body looking right at us, right? And so I had a monocular, not a night vision, just a regular monocular. And so I put it up to my eye and I started zooming in. I can see the head. This is massive. I mean, this is at least 14, 15, maybe 15, 16 feet, maybe bigger than that. Because, I mean, the stride was from one side of the road to the other. I mean, it literally was the middle of this thing was right in the middle of the road, the upper torso. And so I started zooming in. I can see the mouth. So it had fur all the way except around here, right? And you can see the skin. It was kind of a light brownish color, and it looked like almost like a monkey or a gorilla's. And so I'm looking at it. I didn't really look at the nose, and so I start going up to the eye. Now Joe had told me this is a black one, right? He had told me some of them look like they're wearing sunglasses, and I'm like, what in the world? I'm like, what is he talking about? So let's talk about the theory of them having like night vision, right? If you've ever seen an alligator or a shark, they'll have lenses that come down to protect their eyes when they go to eat, right? So maybe this thing does too. Maybe it has bioluminescence around its eyes. I don't know. Or maybe it's just dark black skin. I don't know. But I'm looking at this thing, and the eyeball, I mean, where the eye was probably about the size of a baseball. It was huge. And I'm looking at it, and it's all black. And I start looking at the eye, and where the eyeball was like white. I didn't see any like pupil or anything. I just saw white. Maybe it was still too far away for me to get really good detail. But I mean, this thing was probably like 400 or 500 yards away from us. It did look like it was wearing sunglasses, but it had this white thing right in the middle of that. And so I put the binoculars down, and I went to say something to Joe. I looked back, it was gone.
That is extremely wild, and I've never heard of anybody describe the eyes like that. And I definitely want to have you back on, Matt, because I know you've got so much to unpack there, and it's unfortunate Joe passed away, but I'm glad you were able to spend that time with him and get him some answers, because this stuff leaves you scratching your head, and there's a lot to unpack there. But with your experiences and things that you've had, man, I'm really curious to know what your opinion is on these creatures. For one, they're definitely territorial. I mean, I think you've proven that, and they hang out in areas that I don't think they migrate. I think they kind of stay in one area maybe. But what do you think these things are, man? If you had to take a guess, what do you think they are?
If I had to guess, I would say they're probably maybe a cross between Gigantopithecus and humans. I mean, they could just be some kind of human species that we just don't know of. Maybe they're like an even older species of human that nobody's ever really looked at. I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to say the word, but I'm pretty sure Big Brother knows exactly what they are. And just speaking of territorial, I don't think they're so territorial as they don't want you in their area at certain times.
Matt, you've had a ton of encounters with these things, and definitely need to have you back on for sure, man, so we can go through these and spend some more time get into these, because, man, it's such a strange world, man. I talk about it all the time. There's so much in God's universe we just really do not understand, and man, I love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate you taking the time sharing this with me and my audience, man.
Oh, you're welcome.
Guys, thanks for hanging out with me and Matt tonight. What an incredible episode, man. There's so much there to unpack, and I wish we had more time to get into all this stuff. But if you want us to do longer deep dives into these type of videos, you might consider becoming a member. It helps this channel, helps support us. And if you've got an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Guys, you know I'm going to say it. I can't get off here without saying it. Stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.